So with the dummy places added and our places service in its first basic version added, let's use these places, and let's start in the Discover page where I want to output them. In the Discover page, I therefore will inject my places service, which is possible, by the way, because places service here has add injectable with provided set to root. If we wouldn't have that, we could still inject it, but then we would have to add it to providers in the app module, that service. So that's just important to highlight. But with provided in root here, it's auto provided. And now we can inject it anywhere in this application, for example, in the Discover page, of course. And I want to fetch my places when we load that page. Now I will do that in ng-on-init here, because for now that will work, but be aware that, of course, with all that caching and so on, by the way, pages are also cached when you're going from tab A to tab B. So be aware that with the caching, ng-on-init will not run every time this page becomes visible. But for now, I have no way of changing my places anyways, so I don't need to be able to update them, and therefore fetching them one time only is fine. Hence, here, I'll first of all add my own places or loaded places property in the Discover page. That is of type place, and therefore you need to import that from your place model, and that will be an array of places actually. And in ng-on-init, I'll set this loaded places equal to this places service, which is a property of this class because I added private in front of this argument, which automatically binds this argument to an equally named private property of the class. And therefore here on places service, I can access places, which uses this places getter I defined. So that loads us some places. In the template now of that page, we can now add code to render the places. For that, I'll actually construct the ion grid here with an ion row and an ion column because I want to control the width of that featured place I want to have at the top. So for that, here right at the top, I want to add an ion card in that ion column. That should display my featured place. In that card, we can add an ion card header with an ion card title. And the title now, of course, should be my featured place title. Now, at the moment, I only have my places array. So what we could do here is we simply access place loaded places, and then the first element, and then the title of that element. That is my featured element. The first element of loaded places always is my featured element. Outside of the ion card header, I want to have an image that takes the full width of that card, and therefore we added right here below the header an ion image. And the source of that image should be the URL, the image URL of our place. So source is property bound to loaded places, the first element, and then the image URL. Below the ion image, we'll add the ion card content to wrap the rest of the content we want to display. And for me here, that will simply be my description. So I'll simply add a paragraph here where I output with string interpolation, loaded places, the first element, and then the description. Now the price would also be interesting to see, and I'll add that below the ion card title with the ion card subtitle. And in there, we can simply output loaded places, price, like this, and let's add /night after that. Now that's hard-coded text here, simply not referring to anything dynamic, not referring to an Angular property. That is just some text. And I also want to forward this as a currency, and for that, we can use the currency pipe Angular ships with, which you add with a pipe symbol and then currency. And that's a default Angular feature, not related to Ionic. It just transforms this price to look like a dollar currency out of the box. You could configure that, but the official docs are the place to go for that. When we save this and we go back, this is what we should see. If you're getting an error here, by the way, try restarting the ionic serve process. Quit it with Ctrl-C and then rerun ionic serve. Sometimes you need to do this after adding new files to the project, like we did with our service. That looks beautiful. Now, on a non-mobile device, this card is super big though, and that is exactly what I want to control with my ion grid here in the template. That is why I did wrap my card into the ion grid, because on this ion column here, we can now set a default size of 12. But for, let's say, smaller screens or bigger, we'll set it to 8 and add an offset for the same screen size of 2, so that this is a bit centered. I also want to center all the text that's in there, so the text inside of the card too. This then is applied to all the child elements thanks to CSS inheritance. This looks better. Now the card isn't as large. It's still big, and you could shrink it down further by playing around more with the CSS grid, with the ionic grid sizes. But for me, that will do. We'll dive deeper into the ionic grid later. Don't want to spend too much time on it right now. This is nice. That's the featured place. Now, what about the other places we have? With the featured place, in place, let's also add other places. And for this, I'll add another ion row and another ion column with exactly the same size setup as the card, so that it's nicely aligned below the card. And in here, I want to render all the other places I have. We can use an ion list for this with ion items in there, and then use ng4 to loop through all our places. Now it's up to you if you want to loop through all the places, including the featured one, or only the other places that are not featured yet. I'll go through all the non-featured places by creating a place variable. You can name this whatever you want, and going through our loaded places. And now to get only the one that's not featured, we can use slice here and start at index 1. And this will basically take all the places, all the elements in this loaded places array after the first element, which is our featured element. Ion item is then replicated for all these places, and in there, I'll add an ion thumbnail component, which you can also find in the official docs. You saw ion avatar before. Thumbnail is basically similar, but doesn't render a rounded image, but a square image. And I'll give this a slot of start to position it on the left inside of this ion item. So the slot refers to the surrounding ion item. And inside of ion thumbnail, you use an ion image typically. And here, again, I bind my source dynamically, in this case to place, because I get a place here when I loop through all the places. Image URL. Now, besides the thumbnail and the place, I'll then also add an ion label, which you should use as a wrapper for the other text next to your thumbnail, especially if you plan on using multiple text elements, which I'll do. And then I'll add a h2 tag here, where I output the place title, and beneath that, a paragraph tag with the place description. Something like that. Now with that, if we save this, let's have a look at our result here on the page as it reloads. Here we see the other places.